There is a German family worth billions of dollars that has not given an interview in living memory. Not one. You have almost certainly eaten their food this week. They own the coffee, the donut, the sandwich shop, and the perfume counter. 7 holdings, smallest to largest. I am not saying the name until the end. Number 7. Start with the small stuff. A Scandinavian coffee chain called Espresso House, with hundreds of cafes across Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Finland. Caribou Coffee out of Minneapolis, roughly 800 locations. Einstein Brothers Bagels, another 600 or 700. For a while, they also owned Bally, the Swiss shoemaker founded in 1851, which is roughly as far from a bagel as a business can get. None of these are household names outside their own countries. Together, they are barely a rounding error inside this fortune. But notice the shape of it already. Coffee, bread, sugar. Morning. This family does not buy oil fields or football clubs or newspapers. They buy the first 40 minutes of your day in small, quiet pieces in a dozen different countries at once. So here is the question I want to carry all the way to number 1. How do you own this much and stay completely invisible? Number 6. In May 2016, an investment vehicle almost nobody had heard of agreed to buy Krispy Kreme donuts for $1.35 billion. The deal closed that July. Krispy Kreme was, at that point, an 80-year-old American institution. The hot light in the window, the conveyor belt of glaze, roughly 1,000 shops. There was a takeover, a price, a signature, and then nothing. No new owner on television, no founder's story in the business press, no face. The buyer was a Luxembourg holding company, and behind the Luxembourg holding company was a family that has spent 200 years making sure that sentence is where the trail goes cold. 5 years later, they put Krispy Kreme back on the stock market in 2021 and kept control anyway. That is the pattern in miniature. They take a business private, rebuild it away from the cameras, sell a slice back to the public, and remain the largest owner. The public gets the shares. The family keeps the steering wheel. Number 5. 2 years later, 2018, Pret A Manger, the British sandwich chain with more than 500 shops and a queue outside every one of them at 12:30. Bought by the same buyer, reported at around $2 billion, including debt. Think about what that purchase actually is. Not a brand, not a logo. It is a position. It is the physical spot on the pavement between an office and a train station, in London, in New York, in Paris, at the exact minute that several million people decide they are hungry. That is what this family collects, not trophies, choke points. And I want to put that next to something, because the contrast is the whole point of this video. A fortune of this size, spent loudly, buys a 400-foot yacht and a headline. Spent this way, it buys the lunch of an entire city, every working day, forever, and it buys silence with it. Number 4. April 2017, Panera Bread. 2,000 bakery cafes across North America, $7.5 billion in cash. At the time, it was one of the largest restaurant deals in American history. Panera's founder, Ron Scheich, had spent 30 years building it, and he sold to a buyer whose owners he had, by his own account, barely met. And once inside, Panera stopped behaving like a public company. No quarterly earnings calls, no analysts. It was folded together with Caribou and Einstein Bros into a group called Panera Brands, owned by people who never have to explain a single decision to a shareholder because there are no shareholders. How do you own this much and stay invisible? Part of the answer is right there. You never list anything. If it never trades on a stock exchange, nobody is ever entitled to ask you a question. Number 3. Now it gets strange, because the next thing they bought is not food at all. Around 2019, the same family's holding company moved into veterinary care, buying National Veterinary Associates, one of the largest networks of animal hospitals in the world. Then pet insurance, then more pet insurance, consolidating brands across the United States and Europe into one of the biggest pet insurance groups on the planet. Coffee in the morning, a donut at 11, a sandwich at 1, and the vet who treats the dog and the policy that pays for it. The logic is brutally consistent. Find something people pay for repeatedly, forever, without thinking. Own the whole aisle. Say nothing. And it is a bigger aisle than it sounds. Americans alone spend upwards of $150 billion a year on their pets. Roughly 1 household in 2 has a dog. It is one of the few categories that grows in a recession, because people cut their own spending long before they cut the dogs. Does any of this feel like a coincidence yet? I do not think a single one of these purchases was. Number 2. The perfume counter. For years, this family was the controlling shareholder in Coty, the fragrance and cosmetics giant that holds the licenses for an extraordinary list of names. Gucci Fragrance, Burberry, Hugo Boss, Calvin Klein, Marc Jacobs. Read that again, because this is the trick. They do not own Gucci. They own the right to make and sell the smell of Gucci, which is the highest margin object in the entire luxury industry. A bottle of designer perfume can cost a few dollars to produce and sell for $150, and the license model means the family's name never appears on anything. Not on the bottle, not on the box, not on the advertisement, which is now clearly not an accident. That is a policy. Number 1. Coffee. All of it. In late 2015, the family's holding company paid $13.9 billion for Keurig Green Mountain, the company behind the little plastic pods in tens of millions of American kitchens. Then, in 2018, they announced a $26 billion deal to combine Keurig with Dr. Pepper Snapple. That created Keurig Dr. Pepper, a beverage company large enough to sit in the same conversation as Coca-Cola and PepsiCo. To put that in proportion, $26 billion is more than the price of an aircraft carrier. It was spent on fizzy drinks and coffee pods, and I would guess fewer than 1 person in 1,000 could tell you who spent it. And on the other side of the Atlantic, they had been assembling the same thing in the supermarket aisle. Jacobs, Douwe Egberts, Tassimo, Law, Peet's. All of it folded into a company called JDE Peet's, one of the largest pure-play coffee businesses on earth, pouring, by its own reckoning, billions of cups a year. Pods, jars, beans, cafes, and the drive-thru. In Europe and in America, owned by 4 people whose photographs almost do not exist. So, who are they? Their name is Reimann. The company at the center of it is called JAB Holding. JAB for Johann Adam Benckiser, a chemist who founded an industrial chemicals business in the German town of Pforzheim in 1823. In 1828, another chemist named Ludwig Reimann joined him, married into the family, and by the 1850s, the Reimanns controlled it outright. In 1999, the family's Benckiser merged with the British firm Reckitt and Coleman. That created Reckitt Benckiser, Airwick, Calgon, Woolite, Finish, Lysol, Dettol. So before the coffee, before the donuts, this family already owned the cupboard under the sink in half the homes in Europe. 203 years of compounding in one unbroken line from a chemical works in Pforzheim to a coffee empire in 2 hemispheres. The family fortune has been estimated anywhere from about $11 billion to more than 30, depending entirely on who is counting and what they include. German media has called them the second wealthiest family in the country. And still, most people who buy their coffee every morning of their lives have never once heard the name, because that is deliberate and it is enforced. The heirs are reported to sign an agreement on turning 18, committing them to stay out of public life. No interviews, no red carpets, no profiles. For decades, the day-to-day empire was run by a professional, a non-family executive named Peter Half, who was the public face precisely so that nobody had to be. He retired in 2025 after roughly 40 years. 4 heirs hold the fortune today: Renate Reimann Haas, Wolfgang Reimann, Stefan Reimann Andersen, Matthias Reimann Andersen. There was a 5th. In 2003, Andrea Reimann Ciardelli sold her 11% stake for close to $1 billion and moved to New Hampshire, where she has lived a quiet American life and funded local charities ever since. She is the only one who ever left. And if you want the subscribe button, this is the moment, because what the family found when they finally went looking into their own history is the part almost nobody knows. And I have 3 more dynasties like this coming. Subscribe and stay with me. In 2014, the younger generation of Reimanns hired a professional historian, Paul Erker of the University of Munich, and asked him to go through the family archive properly. In 2019, before the study was even finished, the German newspaper Bild published what he had found. Albert Reimann Sr. and Albert Reimann Jr. had both been members of the Nazi Party and financial supporters of the SS. Their factory used forced labor, Russian civilians, and French prisoners of war. By 1943, as many as 175 forced workers were on the site, roughly a third of the workforce. The historian's findings included beatings and the sexual abuse of women held there. Both men were dead by the time any of this surfaced. Neither had ever spoken about it. The family's public response was blunt. It was worse than they had imagined, and the two men belonged in prison. And then the story turns in a direction that is genuinely difficult to hold in your head. During the war, Albert Reimann Jr. employed a young bookkeeper named Emily Landecker. Her father, Alfred Landecker, was Jewish. He was deported and murdered in the Holocaust. Emily Landecker later had children with Albert Reimann Jr. Their descendants are among the heirs to this fortune today. In 2019, the family renamed its foundation after her father, the Alfred Landecker Foundation, with a budget raised to around 25 million euros a year, funding Holocaust remembrance, research into anti-Semitism, and the protection of democratic institutions. That is the honest, complicated shape of it. A family that commissioned the investigation into itself, published the result, and put its grandfather's victim's name on the door. So back to the question, how do you own this much and stay invisible? The answer is that invisibility was never a side effect of the way this family does business. It is the business. Never list a company and nobody can demand your accounts. Never give an interview and nobody can build a narrative. Buy the ordinary things, the coffee and the bread and the pet insurance, and no journalist will ever write a headline about it. Most great fortunes are built on being seen. A name over a shop door, a face on a magazine. This one was built on the opposite bet, and it worked for 200 years. The donut has a face, the sandwich shop has a face, the owners do not. So subscribe and come back for the next one, because I am going somewhere completely different. A man who was, by some measures, the richest human being of the 20th century. He used a diamond the size of an egg as a paperweight. He kept his money in a room the palace staff were not allowed to enter, and within 20 years of his death, his heir was running a sheep farm in Western Australia.